every Sunday we do stuff like this. We sit around, have conversations about maybe what we heard at church, what's going on in our lives, what's going on during the week. And I think this week will be really good for us to talk about something that really affects, our generation as in y'all's generation and my generation, because we ain't the same. That's cool. I'm not gonna get in no A on it. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. But one thing that's really important and a major contention point is tithing. Tithing is something that we've heard our entire lives about what we should be doing. Grandmama and granddaddy did it their entire lives. Maybe mama and daddy did it. And so there may be some confusion about what that is or where that comes from. And so I'd really like to hear what you all define tithing as, and then the importance of tithing, if at all, is in your life.
I mean, I tithe as a way to get back to God. I don't really, they can talk about, the specifics of tithing and what it is and where to find it in Scripture. Yeah. But I feel like in essence, especially, we're trying to tell somebody the goodness of it and things of that nature, it really just comes down to giving a portion of something back to God.
Cool. What about you, Nick?
In a similar way, I think that one of the things in terms of we hear a lot about tithing in our churches, and we know that it's a practice that comes from the Hebrew tradition. We know that Abram was the first to offer a tithe after God had established a covenant with him. And it's been something, or at least the concept has been extended and even into temple Judaism, right? So as the community has a formalized system of worship,
right,
a formalized structure where they worship, much of the practical function of the tithe was to support the work of the priestly work, right? The church, right? Yeah. So literally a portion of the tithe would feed those who were tasked with caring for God's house and the various instruments that were part of that, as well as supporting their families.
Mm-hmm.
But the other side of which, as I think about tithing, I think we don't sort of often entertain. The other piece of the tithe was it was a set of resources that were valuable to the community that were then offered as that were burned.
Right. Sure.
Right. So if you can think about your most choice, this is an agrarian culture, right? So they're bringing grains, they're bringing cattle and livestock,
doves and birds and stuff.
Yes, doves and birds. But you had to bring one without blemish. You had to bring one that that sort of had aesthetic value,
right?
That looked good, right? And you would watch it burn. There's no value, right? There's no productive value in watching your hard effort, right? The thing that you labored for, that you cared for, watch it go up in smoke. And then the pieces, the pieces of it that would then be functionally used, right? You could witness that. But so with that, it sort of for me raises the question: there seems to be something in tithing that moves beyond practical reasoning, right? And something in tithing that actually sanctifies a divine wastefulness, right? Because it was the smell of the burnt offering that was a sweet savor unto God. Now imagine what would happen if you was in your church and people brought their money and you took their money, and when they put it in that bucket, you poured some oil on it.
I'm ready to fight.
And you lit it up on fire.
I'm ready to fight.
And said that this is a sweet smelling savor.
While you're crying, you're going to have your phone right.
World star.
Right.
Now, Felicia, do you have anything to add to that? I know tithing is something that is, like I said, a contention point for all of us. So what is your perspective on tithing?
For me, tithing, when it comes to personal life, is as far as monetary, is not on my top priority as far as giving funds. For me, tithing is more as giving back into the community. So I can volunteer because for me, I don't feel like I have to give my money to the church in order to do good work. So I prefer to give my funds back or my time back into the community volunteering, because you can see the fruit of your labor when you're out in the community and working. As far as when you're in the church, unless you work in the financial department, where my money going? That's how I look at it.
That's real. And, you mentioned something about seeing the works of what you give. And you also said something about tithing of your time. And
Mhm.
so for me, I think I've always heard the passage Malachi 3, 8 and 18. And most of us come from a Methodist context. And so we know about when we give our alms or give benevolence, they read this scripture. And I'm gonna read it for everybody here. Malachi 3, 8 and 18 says, "Will a man rob God? Yet ye have robbed me, but you say, wherein have we robbed thee? In tithes and in offerings." And then verse 9 is where we kind of start to put an obligatory kind of statement on it. "Ye are cursed with a curse, for ye have robbed me, even this whole nation." Verse 10, "Bring ye all the tithe into the storehouse, that there may be meat in my house. And prove me now herewith, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, and that there shall not be room enough to receive it." So I just read what the Bible says about that, and I think it's important that we hear all sides of this tithing conversation, because so many people have seen what the church has done with the finance that it brings in. And so my question would be, if someone does give to their community, or decides to just give to their church, or make a conversation to give to both, are they right? Are they wrong? Or can anybody really make that kind of distinction? Can anybody say you should be doing it this way or that way?
Well, I
I
feel like
think it's up to the particular person,
Yeah.
because you can't tell someone what's right in their heart. So, like you trying to say that I have to give money and that's my blessing by me giving, who are you to tell me how I should receive my blessing? Because I may think that my blessing has come, like I said, volunteering, giving back, or doing something that I'm passionate about. Is that's how I feel that I receive my blessing, and it just shouldn't be based on putting money in the envelope, licking it, and putting it in the tray. Like I just don't believe that.
Okay, Nick, what's your response to that?
I think that there's a part of it that's a little bit ahistorical for our community context. When I think about the Black church in particular, the Black church never emerged as an institution that was connected to um, any legal, political system that was beneficial for Black people. And so when we look at the resources and the possibilities that emerge, there's no other institution in the world like the Black American Church that's been able to use resources from sharecroppers, laundry washers, everyday people who had menial jobs, who built schools, who built hospitals, who owned properties, right? Who owned land. And it was because of how they understood the primacy of the role of their faith, their religious faith in their lives, that the community had resources. Now, obviously, we live in a very different time, right, than even 60 years ago, before the Civil Rights Movement, 70 years ago. Before the Civil Rights Movement, in that respect, that opened up a wider range of opportunities for Black folks to have jobs that they did not have before 1964.
True.
And so our resources are now dispersed outside of our communities in ways that they hadn't been before, right? So if it wasn't for the church that allowed somebody to start off their little bakery downstairs, they wouldn't have been able to get the money to own a shop in the town square. If it wasn't for the church that that folks brought their leftover remnants of fabric, right, for somebody to create new things from it, then there wouldn't have been sort of the resources that are available. So I think that some of what we have to recognize is that the reason why we can have this conversation is because there were people who invested in the only institution that Black folks had for over 3 centuries, right? You could not own shops, you could not own schools and businesses, but you could have a little storehouse that also dubbed as your schoolhouse, which was also your church house.
Right.
So I think to some extent, if we can hold historically what it meant to have a place where resources were brought together that not only honor God, but that actually honor our community, that's a very different orientation than we have now, where you have the celebrity pastor, where you have, the pastor who's inviting you to give money so that they can have a personal jet to travel all across, the world where they may want to go. I think that that's not where our church started.
True.
Right. That's where it may be in some places, but that's not the legacy, right, that we benefit from. So I'll leave it at that.
No, and I think that puts a little tension between your statement and Felicia's statement because the historical context of giving, as you said, in our community, comes from this idea that we did not have individual resources.
Mm-hmm.
The only way we were able to survive was to come together, pull those resources together, and start our education, start our other businesses. You know, we're in Atlanta, Morehouse College, Spelman College, Morris Brown, those three for sure I know started in the basement of somebody's church.
I mean, but even then, it's like you think about it, right? So when it comes to tithing, shouldn't we get back to the basics and kind of getting back to what Felicia's saying? You know, I might not have the monetary to give, but if I'm giving my time, or if I'm giving that old jacket or that old cloth or whatever the case is to help, to help someone else out, that should be just as good as if I did give the said 10% to the church. And I think that's what's lacking.
Yeah.
The lack thereof tithing is no one's talking about how you can tithe your time, how you can tithe your talents, how you can tithe yourself in essence, and not just a dollar amount.
Mm-hmm. And I think that poses a two-faced coin, right? So one, you have the people who all they do is give their money, and they never volunteer time. They never give of themselves to other people. They never serve their communities. So does the word say, the word being in this context, a Christian text called the Bible, does the word say that they are to be more blessed than I am? Because I don't have that 10%. I have light bill, water bill, gas bill. My kids have to go to school. I got medical bills. I got, student loans. Am I to be cursed because I can give 10% of my time? I can go down to the church or the community center and give to my community, but I just don't have 10% of disposable income to give. Is there anywhere that kind of points me in a direction on how I should feel? Should I be convicted? Should I feel vindicated? Wherein do I lie if that's my story?
I feel that if you can't give, then you can't, right? Because it's true, we have things that we have to take care of. And it's, if we even want to take it to the point of, being biblical with it, and says the Lord loves a cheerful giver. Well, if I'm upset because I have to give the church my last, and I know I have my student loan to pay, and I have my rent to pay and everything else, will my tithe hold as much weight? Because at this point, I'm not cheerful that I'm, I'm saying
right.
that I'm giving.
No, that's real. That's
what I mean? But now I'm kind of upset because other people have made me feel convicted for not giving this 10%. I'm a firm believer in I tithe. It might not be a full 10%. Some Sundays it's not a full 10. Some Sundays it's because things worked out in my favor. I can give more than 10%. But do I feel that the Sunday where I was only able to give that $5 holds less weight than the Sunday I was able to give $500? Absolutely not.
Wow.
I don't.
But I think that's where like the ministry part come in. Is we should make people feel less than if they have less. Because more people, more than likely, if you're volunteering in the community, helping out in the church, you're giving way more than 10% of your time in comparison to someone giving 10% of their money. Even when I worked in the church in the finance department, I used to get to church at 8 o'clock in the morning, sometimes not leaving until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So if I'm doing that 3 days a week, I'm giving way more than 10% of my time in comparison to someone if they're $100, $200 a week. So I feel like my time as comparisons to their money is equal and should hold as equal weight, if not as more. And pastors should not make it feel like, hey, if you come up here and you give me $75 or you stay here and you get $50 and you're blessing people based on the amount of money that they give, like that makes absolutely no sense. And to me, it's like false doctrine because you're trying to put people against each other instead of bringing people together based on, hey, we're all in this together and we're one. So don't put me against somebody else because I'm not giving as much, or my blessings is as less because I'm not giving as much. So I think that's where it starts from the pastor level and works its way down. Because a lot of times the pastors don't even give 10% of their tithing.
Uh-oh. Now that's a very interesting comment and perspective. Nick, I want you to respond, especially to one point that she said. She said most of the time people don't have it. Mm-hmm. So can you respond to the people who don't have it and the people who do? Because I want to make a clear distinction, because some people don't give because they genuinely don't have it. Mm-hmm. Some people don't give because they choose not to. Mm-hmm. And so I would like you to respond to that from my original question with those two side pieces.
Yeah, so Felicia, as you was talking, I was thinking about the story in the Gospels where Jesus is with his disciples and they are looking at people come into the temple and put in their alms. Mm-hmm. And there's an old woman who comes and she's got 2 little mites, right? I think they even call them widow's mites. Like, so it's a very small amount of money. And then other folks who come in and they have large amounts of money and they're putting the money in and they're making a big show of like that their money is silent. Right, that they're putting in, and her money is clanking, right? It's making noise. And Jesus says to his disciples that this woman will be remembered because she did not give from her abundance, she gave from her poverty. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we've oftentimes flipped what we think is the source of giving, that we think the source of giving is a reflection of my awareness of abundance, right? That I have enough to give. And I think what Jesus affirmed in that story, and this too can be abused, any of these things can be abused or taken out of context, is that there was something about that woman's faith that she did not give because she had a lot. She gave because she had a little. Like that was the reason she was giving, but it wasn't sort of like the way that a kind of neo-prosperity gospel would tell us, right, that, they call it the seed offerings and the sacrificial giving, where
sowing seeds,
right? That you need to, if it don't hurt you, then it ain't gonna bless you. You need to feel the heat in your
redemptive
pocket.
Suffering.
Right. That there's something redemptive about you overstretching yourself, and I don't think that's what Jesus was affirming in that text. I think Jesus was affirming a woman who recognized, and this is connected to some other biblical principles that I think we've lost sight of. A woman who recognizes that my ability to survive is based on God's goodness.
Sure.
And God's goodness is not a scarce resource. Mm-hmm. And the testimony that we have as Black folks is that they did not build the schools that our children go to when we had a Black president. The school was not built when Barack Obama came on the scene, wasn't built when Kamala Harris came on the scene. These things came into being when our ancestors were not even a full generation out of slavery. When was the last time, with all the resources that Black folks have now, that we actually built a school with the additional resources that we have now that we did not have in the last place? When was the last time our churches, right, built community development centers and not just larger sanctuaries?
Yes. Yeah.
And those pieces. So I think that there's something that we've lost sight of. And another part of that too, that I think is connected to tithing, particularly if we're talking about it from a biblical perspective, is tithing is also connected to the biblical principle of Sabbath, right? Genesis chapter 1, it says that for 6 days God created, and what did God do on the 7th day?
Rested.
So 1/7 of God's own godness is predicated on rest.
Okay.
So if you think about 1/7, which is greater than 1/10, right? It mattered more that the people of God would understand that their lives are sustained by 1/7 of their time being dedicated to rest, right? And so if we had a sense that like God sustains us in rest and that we value rest, then giving from what we produce, right, as we work on the earth that God gave us, right, as we put our hands to the plow, to apply our labor, right, to the natural resources and the habitats, communities, and contexts that we're a part of, that 1/10 pales in comparison to 1/7, right? Imagine 1/7 of your life spent in this sort of like worship of God as rest, right? This is the Sabbath that, many Jewish communities still hold in terms of on the Sabbath, it's just worship and it's rest. We don't have that in our context. We live in a context where if your boss says, I need you here tomorrow at 6, if you want to keep your job, what do?
Clock in.
You're going in.
Yeah.
Right, and so to some extent, the place where we actually have placed our fear is not a fear in the Lord, but it's a fear of the consequences of how we survive in the natural world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if your pastor was like, "I really need you to be here tomorrow," and said, "Oh, pastor, oh, come on, pastor, the folks gonna be late. They ain't gonna be there till 8 o'clock anyway. Why you over here at 7?"
Yeah.
Right, but your boss say, "I need you here at 7, and I need you here at 7 o'clock sharp." You gonna ask what you need me to wear. Am I coming in uniform? If they tell you to wear a uniform, you gonna show up in a uniform. Yeah. But that's because we believe that our jobs sustain us.
Yeah.
And so there has to be something that shifts our faith to help us to recognize that it is in God we live, that it is in God we move, that it is in God we have our being. And if I don't have no money, can the Lord still provide for me?
Mm-hmm. And even even with all of that, yeah, because I claim to be a tither. It's something that I was raised to do. It's something that I have found works for my life. But even in the times where I didn't tithe, I was still blessed. And so I think it becomes even a touchy point when I talk about tithing to my friends, my contemporaries, my peers. I cannot truthfully say all the time I was blessed because I tithed. Because sometimes I missed it. Sometimes I didn't do it, and those blessings still came.
Right. The real blessing I see in tithing is that it gives you a different perspective on your life being supported by money. Right. So the real blessing of tithing is that it allows you to have a sense of God's provision, that even if my money gets to be funny, I know the Lord provides. Yeah. And even if it's not provided today, even if it's not provided tomorrow, right, I know that God is taking care of me. An example is that, like, for me, a very personal example, my wife and I, we tithe. And last summer, I was diagnosed with lymphoma, with cancer. And so we started getting these bills in. I mean, my treatments were $150,000 a pop. Right? And so I'm like, who gonna pay for it? Right? Who gonna pay for it? And so I'm like, we just don't have these kind of resources, right? And so I had health insurance, and so health insurance starts to kick in. But what started to become clear was, like, God just being like, I got this. I got this. Yeah, the medical bill's gonna sit there. Some of them will probably be there before you, after you die. But I got this, right? And if I live in the fear of, like, oh my gosh, I gotta pay Northside. Northside. So Northside called, and Northside was like, "Oh, Mr. Peterson, because I was nearing my out-of-pocket max, right, before the insurance covers 100%." It's like, "Mr. Peterson, we need you to pay such and such and such." I was like, "I really don't have that. I'm finishing grad school. Right. I'm like, I got 2 kids. We paying my daycare. I was like, daycare's a grip. Yeah, so like, well, what can you pay? Like, well, can you pay this?" And I was like, "Yes, I can pay that." Right. And so it was literally. It was like, if it was $8,000, they were like, "Can you pay 1,000?" And I was like, "I can pay 1,000," and it just canceled off the whole, right, that whole debt. So I think that there's something to be said about how when we do cultivate, which is why I opened with that, the wastefulness of tithing from the biblical perspective was a reminder that I am not sustained by that which can be burned up, and just the burning of it be something sweet to God, but I'm sustained by the God who owns, right, the cattle upon 10,000.
So my whole thing is, I think one of the biggest issues when it comes to the idea of tithing and where we should be with it and where we're not with it and how it can be used to do good and how it can be used to build our community is, I think in the church, the reason why tithing, there's the lack thereof is because a lot of the times people are equating your tithe with position and power, right? So if I'm not tithing, but you're tithing, and something goes down, and I don't want to, and I'm told not to confront you because Gabe, he's a tither of the church. Yeah. So that right there is, I feel like that's one of the biggest flaws when it comes to tithing is that people are equating what you give to the church, so they don't care that you spent the 8+ hours there a day. They don't care if you're driving the church bus. They don't care if you're volunteering to take the YPD out. They don't care about none of that. If your money is funny, or if your money isn't matching with what X, Y, and Z is doing over here, because that, to me, that's when the value of tithing has gone down the drain.
Yeah, and
it has gone down the drain.
I think that gives us another perspective on how we should look at giving and tithing as a whole. As Felicia said it about the importance of her to give back to her community. You spoke about your time with your health and how you were able to pay your own medical bills. If well, you were able to pay a portion of that medical bill, therefore a portion was wiped away. There are churches that are paying millions and millions of dollars in medical debt for people, and I think that only comes from tithing. So, could the church not help you in those situations because you tithe? Do you think the church should say, "Hey, Nick, I know you're a tither. Let's take care of that for you," or do you feel it's not really the church's responsibility to handle your personal life, even if you are a giver? And you can hit, and then Felicia, I want to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I don't know that it's a tit for tat that I give into the church so that the church can give back to me. You know, that sort of relationship.
Yeah.
Right. You know, I think what, unfortunately, most of our churches are not tithing churches, right? So for as much as churches talk about tithing, I would say on average there's probably about 20% of any given church where people are effectively, tithing. That being said, I would venture to say that those who are tithing, if you hold them as a collective, that they make up the majority of any church's budget. Right. And so when you look at, what's the basic principle of the 80-20, 20% of people who are carrying 80% of the burden, things along those lines. And so the thing with our present context, right, is that when we come to church, we want the music to sound like it sounded on the CD.
On the record.
Right?
Sing it like
we want the preacher to not sound like they're not educated. Right? We want them to go to seminary. We want them to at least know how to read a book, know how to parse a verb, and all of those things. We want our church to aesthetically look inviting so that when we invite our friends and our family to come, then they're like, this is where you worship?
Right.
All of those things take Caesar's money.
The purple lights.
Yeah. Right? We want to be live streamed. We want, we want robes. The choir want robes. You got to pay for instruments. Right, all of these things take Caesar's resources, and so to that end, the extent to which we are obligated to manifest, these sort of popular representations of success in our worship, right, in our worship experience, right, in the production of our worship, you got to pay for it.
Yeah.
Right, if you find with Uncle Jim Bob with his 2 strings on his guitar, playing and singing, so be it, right? And there are churches that are like that, and they grow, and people have wonderful, active spiritual lives. But if you want your church to sound like Donald Lawrence, singing Donald Lawrence, then you're going to have to pay a minister of music who can direct like Donald Lawrence and train choir parts like Donald Lawrence. You're going to have to pay, a set of musicians who can play like Antoine Foster and everybody else on these instruments. You're going to have to, you're going to have to be out of pocket. And so if you look at our church's budgets reflect the priorities that our church communities have.
Felicia, tag in right there.
Absolutely. So listen to Nick. I think we have gone away from what the church is, because if I want a concert, I pay to go to a concert. So when we go to church, I don't think, look back in the 60s or whatever region or era we want to look at. People did instruments, choir from the goodness of their heart. If they did give, it wasn't a lot. It was just a donation. Thank you for, providing your skills and your time for us and worshiping with us and all that other good stuff. So when we're talking about the aesthetics of a church, I don't think my tithing should go to because we want this great landscaping, because we want this nice building. We can go out to the basketball court in the community where we should be reaching people to have church outside of the building and having church outside in order to reach people. Because if we keep waiting on people to come to the church, no one's going to ever come. So what happened to us going outside of the church where we're not paying all this extra money for buildings and paying all this extra money for Mercedes Benz and Sprinter vans to pick people up to go to church? Like, why do we need a Mercedes Sprinter van to pick people up in a church? I think we're looking more for looks instead of what we're supposed to be going to church for, which is fellowship and worshiping God. So that's why the church is always, I'm going to call it, begging for money, because they're trying to outdo the next church. So that comes from the top of the pastor and working its way down. And that's why I feel like I don't give money or the 10% to the church because it's going for the wrong reasons, because that's not what I give my money for. If my money is going to be used for God and for helping people, then landscaping ain't it.
I hear you. I hear you. So, I have a clarifying question or a follow up question. Do you attend a brick and mortar church?
So I have been in Atlanta for 7 years, and I came here from Michigan. Prior to me coming to Atlanta or Georgia area, I was in church every day. I grew up Baptist. I worked in the church had about maybe 70 members. It wasn't a huge church. We were more
Okay.
like family.
Yeah.
When I came to Atlanta, it was like everybody wanted my money.
Right.
Like, no,
Right.
like that's not what I grew up in church doing. Yes, we tithe. Yes, we had vacation Bible school. People used to bring food. We didn't ask for money. People just pitched in, brought the food that they want. We cooked the food and all that other good stuff. So it wasn't until I came to the bigger city to see how they do church a
Yeah.
whole lot differently from where I'm from.
Right, right, and I wanted you to answer that question specifically to tag in what Cassie and Nick have talked about, and it's because of the celebrity gospel that has come from what we know church to be today. You talked about the '60s and '70s and how people used to sing just for the glory of God, and my mind automatically went to Dr. Mattie Moss Clark, the Church of God in Christ, and how the Church of God in Christ has been the main pusher for what we know today as gospel music and the gospel industry, and how things have gone from we just doing this because we want to do it from the goodness of our heart to it really being a production. I'm not saying that's a bad
Mm-hmm.
thing. I believe excellence should carry over in any
Absolutely.
space. But we have, especially in major cities, made church celebrity culture. So the pastor also has to have a Benz, a Ferrari. God's goodness is only equated to monetary things, and capitalism has crept into Christianity. Can you all talk about what you all are doing as a pastor, as possibly a future pastor, as someone who has gone to church and may not be doing it the same way that they did it before? How you're trying to make sure your motives remain pure when it comes to giving, service, and church culture?
I think for me, it's just really being myself and keeping an open heart. Understand that everything I do is because I want to do it for the goodness of God. That's, in my tithing, in my serving of the church, and anything that I do, I just want to make sure that the work that I'm doing is a reflection of the work that God's doing in my life. And so I would hope that in God working in my life and working through me to do all these great things, that I'm not being judged by the fact that I was only able to put $25 in offering last week, or that I wasn't able to give at all. But I think, to get back to where we were, is that we have to remember why we do it in the first place. We have to remember why we are giving. We have to remember why we are serving, and then you have to take the reflection of taking it back of, as believers, God has already made a way in so many ways. So let me go ahead and be, good to the next person. Let me go ahead and be good to my church. Let me go ahead and just be a good person.
Yeah.
And I don't feel that, having a good heart and being a good person should have any kind of dollar amount. The way you serve shouldn't have a dollar amount. But I think it just generally comes down to, hey, I serve God because I want to serve God, because God has been good to me. So let me be as good to my congregation. Let me be as good to my community. And then most importantly, let me just continue to be me.
Yeah.
That's all I ever strive for. I just want to be me, whether I'm giving or not giving, whether I'm serving or not serving. When someone sees me, I just want them to understand that, God's doing something in me that's allowing me to be in this room having this conversation. Not feeling convicted because I'm able to admit that, shoot, sometimes I just don't have it.
Yeah.
But you know what? But I serve, and so I was so happy that Felicia made that point that, sometimes your giving is your serving. And I think that was something that even as a, I'm going to say a pastor in training, someone who's trying to get there, one thing I want to remember, and I'm going to take that with me, that sometimes people are giving of their time and of their talents. And that shouldn't be looked at any less than because it's not a dollar amount.
Okay, got it. What about you, Nick?
A couple of things. One is most pastors do not live like the 7 mega churches in the metropolitan area.
Yeah.
Most of our pastors are bi and trivocational, and they're serving congregations. And this is a period across the church, not just the black church, but Christian churches in general.
That's a good point.
Are serving congregations that are smaller than 100 people. Right? So they are principals at schools, they are attorneys during the day, they are teachers, they are educators, they are funeral directors, right? They are musicians. So most of our pastors are not as far removed from the pews as if we would make it off the scene, right? One of, I think, the cultural challenges that we have in black churches in particular is that because for centuries we've been denied the most basic luxuries, right? The most basic pleasantries of life. It's sort of like the church has been our means by which we establish our own form of royal court.
True.
Right?
True.
We wear our Sunday best, grandmama didn't wear their Sunday best. Your best clothing is reserved for going to worship. And there's something to be said about the way the first family in particular is to represent the hopes, the aspirations, and the dreams of an entire community. Right? Now, obviously that has changed, and now with this megachurch model where people can be in ministry and make millions, right, off of a ministry, be that books, CDs, conferences, and so on and so forth, that does not speak for the majority of the communities that are gathered on Sunday, right? And the realities that most of our churches are facing. The truth is that most of the people who are under the employ of our churches do not have health insurance because our churches are not organized in such a way that they can actually barter effective health insurance programs. So for many a pastor, their health insurance comes through a spouse who also works a secular full-time job, or through the healthcare exchange that came from the Affordable Care Act. And so to that extent, I think that we have a lopsided view about where most of our churches are on the ground in terms of what's going on with financial resources, as opposed to what we see on television. Everybody's church is not T.D. Jakes' Potted House. Right. It's not Joe Osteen's, Compact Center in Houston. It's not Steve Furtick. It's not Bethel Music. It's not Elevation. It's not Hillsong. Right. It's not. That's not the majority of where our churches are. The majority of our churches are about 90% volunteer led, and then those that have professional staff. The flip side of that professional staff is that if I'm bringing a service that I was trained for, right, as a light technician, as a sound technician, as an instrumentalist, I've dedicated time, energy, and effort to perfecting my craft. Right? When I bring it into the storehouse as a gift, am I not to be sort of recognized or compensated for that? Is a workman not worth his hire? That's it. Right? Would you go to your job and allow them to pay you less when you went and you got your master's degree in business, and they're like, well, yeah, you got your master's degree in business, but we really just want you to be doing X, Y, and Z, so why would we pay you more? Or why would we honor and recognize that? So if the church is functioning as an institution, right, alongside other sort of secular institutions, then to some extent it is too obligated, right, by the rules and the ebbs and flows of the supply and demand. Why is it $600 a week to get an organist in Atlanta? Because there's a lot more churches than there are organists. Right? Now, that may not be the case if you go down to Jessup, where you got 6 kids waiting to fight to get on the instrument at a church. Right? But here, that is the case. So I think that it's not just a matter of whether or not we are trying to have a concert ready, worship, and if that is in fact the way of honoring God. I think some of it's just like the context that you're in. Like if you are on a coast or if you're in a major city, it just electricity costs more. Some of those resources like that cost more. Property taxes or whatever the fees are associated, with those things cost a lot more, depending on where you are in the country. We're talking about life in San Diego, right? As opposed to other parts of like even coming here and the cost of living adjustment between living on the coast and living in a place like Atlanta. So I think it would be imprudent of us to sort of assume that churches are all sort of that the general baseline is that churches are operating maliciously. As someone who's lived in a pastor's house, as someone who has been mentored by pastors, I know firsthand how many pastors have built out the church with their own resources. How many pastors have foregone the money that they needed to provide for their own household so that the church's lights would stay on. How many pastors who forego, like who gave up, aspirations of driving the Mercedes Benz, right, for the sake of the church being able to get new carpet or be painted.
Yeah.
And that these are not uncommon stories, but they're not the stories that make it, to the media.
Felicia?
Absolutely. So just listening to what Nick was saying, I think it kind of does us a disservice to compare going to church and going to work. When I go to work, I'm going there for to make money, to do my work, come home. I'm not going there to get anything out of it. Like, yes, I probably went to school for this degree. Yep, I got student loans that I have to pay. But when I go to work, if I meet friends, I meet friends. That's fine. But for most of the day, I'm working a 9 to 5, go to work, come home, not looking for anything more, anything less. When you go to church, you're you're letting yourself be out there. Like that's for me, those are my most vulnerable moments is when I'm in church because I feel like I'm with people who are also vulnerable. So to compare going to work, compare going to church to me, I don't think those it's like apples to oranges because you're going to church to get something out. You're putting something in and you're getting something out, which is spiritual, which is way more beyond than what money that you can make at a 9 to 5 can do. Because sometimes when you go to church, you don't do nothing, but you're so exhausted afterwards because you're giving so much of yourself.
Yeah.
So when I leave from work, half of the time I don't even I'm not giving anything. I'm doing it's repetitive because I'm doing the same thing every day, all day. So I'm not giving myself to that job. When I'm going to church, I'm laying myself at that altar. I'm giving my soul, my spirit to get something out of that. As far as I understand that the church is a business. Yes, you need money to keep the lights on. Yes, you need money for water and all that other stuff. So I understand that it does take money to run a church. What I'm saying, it does not take a church can have $2 million or $1 million just sitting in their banking account when you go up the street and you have homeless people, or the mother is got 3 kids on her hip and can barely afford food for her kids. I think that's where the bulk of the leftover money or the savings of the church should go. Yes, we have musicians. Yes, we have the organists, and we have paid guest speakers and all that other stuff. But I think the bulk of the money should go back into the community because when you put back into the community, you get more from the community because now people want to go to that church or go to church in general, not just because that church gave them money, but because they see that somebody actually cares about them. And I think churches is lacking of caring for people that are not just in that church. But the church is the community. It's just not the people who sit in those pews every Sunday or Wednesday a Bible study. We have to go outside of those brick walls and help the people on the outside because 9 times out of 10, they need it more than the people that are actually in church. And you do have the people who want to go to church, but then when they get to church, when the pastors only ask about money, that's deterring them because they feel like they don't have the money to give. So what makes them worthy enough to sit in these pews every Sunday when the only thing that they hear about is the church need money, we need building fund, we having a conference, donate $65 and things like that. So that deters the people who don't have money to give to not want to come to church. So I think we should be reaching outside and say, hey, even if you don't got it, even if you don't have time to give, because if you're a single mother with 4 kids, you don't have time, and 9 out of 10, you don't have the money. So we should embrace people for just coming to church instead of thinking about what they can and cannot give.
That's a beautiful point. And what I'm hearing from the responses from the conversation is that the three of us, the three of you as respondents, and me included in this conversation, is that there's a perception thing going on, right? If we're all looking at the same bottle of hot sauce, we're all looking at the same bottle of hot sauce, but Felicia sees it differently than I do, and Nick sees it differently than Cassie does, and all of us are talking about this one bottle of hot sauce from a different perspective. rather than just taking that bottle of hot sauce for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And churches,
You better preach it.
no, churches are not all the same, right? And so some of the major mega churches started off just the way as Felicia is talking about, going into the community, doing things that were helping people, providing after school programs for kids, providing funds and food pantries and soup kitchens for people. And because of that, they grew to the level of a West Angeles. They grew to the level of a Greater Allen Cathedral. They grew to the level of an All Nations, Chicago or New York. I think once we get to that point, as you were saying, we often lose focus on how we got there.
Yeah.
And so moving forward, I think that all of us can talk about our respect, maybe not love for the church, but our respect for the church for what it's. Some people don't. Some people know. Some people. Some people are definitely in the mindset to abolish the church. Just the same as people are with this whole abolish the police thing.
Yeah.
Because people are not saying the institution of it is wrong. They're more saying that the work that has been done by the institution has caused harm. Mm-hmm. And because it has caused harm, it should no longer exist. Mm-hmm. And so as we move forward, as this conversation goes into its second portion, I think those are some things that we should keep in mind as we leave this mountaintop experience and go back to our different communities, our different spheres of influence, about how we address and get to this idea of giving. So it seems that we're saying giving is more than just money, right? Yeah. Giving is time, talent, treasure, but money is also important because the church needs money. Mm-hmm. One's blessings may come from said money. Yeah. Go ahead, tag in.
Yeah, so that reminds me of the passage in Acts, I think it's 4 and 5, with Ananias and Sapphira, who the early church, as the sort of model of thinking about resources differently, in Acts chapter 2, after they all get hallelujah saved, sanctified, right? Yes. They sell all that they have, right? And they have everything in common. Mm-hmm. And there's a way that, like, in other parts, other stages of my life, that I was like, that's what the church is supposed to be about. But they didn't stay in Acts 2. Mm-hmm. Right? Acts 2 was a phase. That was an elementary phase of the church, where they sold all that they had everything in common. By the time you get to 4 and 5, there's this couple, and they own a parcel of land. And between themselves, they decide to sell the parcel of land and to bring it to the storehouse. Now, before they got there was this brother who they called Barnabas, who had sold his land, and he got the name Barnabas, right? That's what the disciples named him. And so they were like, well, let's sell our land and we're going to bring the money. So they sold the land and they brought the money. But they didn't bring the whole. They didn't bring what they sold. They only brought a portion of it, but presented it as if it was the whole. Mm-hmm. And so when they come before Peter and they bring this gift to Peter, the husband comes and says, we sold this parcel of land for this amount, and he gives it. And he says, why have you didn't lie to me, why have you lied to the Holy Spirit? And the man falls dead. A couple of hours later, his wife comes in, and they ask her, did your husband sell this amount of land for this amount? And she was like, he sure did. And he was like, Peter told her, just as the fate of your husband, so it is your fate. She drops dead. They drag her out by her feet and bury her next to the husband. What's so key about that text was that it did not matter how much of it they gave. If they sold it for $100 and they brought $99, it did not matter that they gave $99. What mattered is that they withhold the one. Yeah. And so what was at stake was that in their mindset, their lives were only worth what they were willing to withhold. And so I think the challenge that we have with giving, whether it's our time, whether it's our talent, and especially if it's our money, is that we oftentimes think that the issue is about how much we give. And that's not the issue. The issue is about what are we willing to withhold, because what we are willing to withhold really tells us what the value of our own lives. Right. So their lives were only worth what they were willing to withhold. So if they gave 100 and they sold it for 101, their lives were worth the $1 that they wanted to keep for themselves. Wow. Right?
So I have a question for you. So are you saying that, because we are going to reference the Bible as the 10% that we are supposed to give. So, and I just want to make sure that I'm hearing you correctly. Are you saying that we should give the max that we can give? If not, then we...
No, it wasn't. What I'm saying is that the issue was not in what they were giving. It was in what withholding.
Their heart.
So if they
Their
had
heart.
right, which is really gets at what's in your heart, because if they had gone and said, we sold the land for 100 and we are bringing 50, then they're being upfront and honest about what they're bringing, right? They're saying, this is what I got, this is what I got it for, this is what I'm bringing. But what they did is they brought a portion, right? So they didn't give a whole, they brought a portion and presented it as if they were giving the whole.
Giving whole.
Anyway, that I can bring something half-ass, right? And act as if like I'm really bringing you my best.
Right, and that's the issue. That's the problem. It's the dishonesty and the intent by which you gave what you gave, which gets back to one of Cassie's first points, that whether I give $1,000 or $100, it matters about the position of my heart in that giving, in that service. And so, Cassie, can you respond to what Nick was saying?
I mean, I feel that what he said, it was clear, right? So it's about, and it goes back to what I said before. The good book says the Lord loves a cheerful giver.
The good book.
The good book says it. So why would I be miserable giving my last? Knowing that now, how am I going to sustain? Instead of really being like, Lord, you know what? Let me be happy because you've made a way. So I'm going to give you a portion of what I can. You know what I mean? Because I feel that when it comes to a blessing, God's going to meet you halfway. If you're a believer, I'm a firm believer that He's not going to let you fall, so He's not going to let you drop, right? But the key to it is you have to be honest with yourself. If you know that you want to tithe and you know your light bill is $100 and you know you only got 105, you can't give 55. You have to just give that 5. You know what I'm saying? In my book, because at the same time I'm obedient because I'm giving, and I'm also handling my business. Now that leaves me with nothing. But I bet for that whole week, because I was obedient in my giving, that God is going to provide for me to make it through. That's how I feel about it. And that's a personal test. I've been there. You know what I mean? Where it's been like, okay, I do want to give, and I'm going to give what I can. Now I'm going to be real. I'm not going to tap into my bill money because I have to sustain. We talked about, I don't have mommy daddy money. So I have to get it. I got to clock in and I got to do what I have to do. But although I'm handling business here, I'm going to make sure that my business with the Lord is handled.
Felicia, your final response to what Nick said in response to your question.
What I would say is, and I'm sorry, I know that you said Nick, but I'm just gonna piggyback off of Cassie for like a quick second. If my light bill is $108 and I only have 105, the church not getting 5. My light bill is gonna get that whole 105.
Actually, the analogy was $100 is the bill. $100. I made $1,000 this month. My final bill. It's either $100 for my lights or $100 for tithes. But that $100 is going somewhere, and I'm gonna have $5 left over. Cassie says, I'm gonna go ahead and give that 5. Right? I'm gonna give my all to the church. And you're saying you're gonna say that $5 to hold you through the week, right?
Absolutely.
Heard you.
Because I know that that people want to give, but I'm also a firm believer that God gave me, Felicia, common sense. And I'm going to make sure that I at least have $1 a day until I get paid, just in case if I need a pack of ramen noodles. So if I gave my last $5 to the church, I understand that the Lord blesses me. Somebody may come up to me and say, "Hey, Felicia, here's an extra $10," but I'm gonna use the good common sense that the Lord gave me and hold on to that $5. And if I so happen to come into any additional money throughout the week, then I will contribute to the tithes. But I'm just gonna use the good common sense that the Lord gave me, and I'm gonna hold on to my good $5.
Amen. Amen. I'm with that. I think this is gonna be one of our, if not our final, one of our final questions. I read the text in the beginning about will a man rob God? Will a person rob God? How do you rob God? You do it in your tithes and offering. And then verse 9 says you're going to get cursed with a curse. Is it fair that I get cursed if I don't have the funds to give of my time, my talent, or my treasure? Or is fair not something that God is concerned with?
I think that the problem with the structuring of that question is it is premised on scarcity,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's premised on I don't have enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to get at what what Cassie's been saying about that it's the heart, it's the mindset, it's the orientation one has. I think that some of where our faith is stretched is as we allow God to not be one among, but to be the, right? So God is not my tithing, and this is my orientation toward tithing. My tithing is not a bill.
Mm.
It's
So it
not,
should be budgeted.
It's not a deducted. It's not a. It's not. It doesn't fall within the register of how I think about my bills.
Mm-hmm. It's not a line item.
Right. So it doesn't. My tithe is something that is actually orienting me toward my bills, but it is not determined by the nature of my bills. And so some of what that's meant in my life is that I've had to think about. Okay, I'm living off the 90%. I'm not living off just in the same way that people think about, this is what we think about as it relates to the federal government. Whether you like it or not, if you on a W-4 or W-2 rather, the government is going to take their money before it even hits your account. And if they don't take it before it hits your account, by April 15th of the following year, they will collect it. And after April 15th, they will collect it with interest, right? So they're going to get their money, and our return is sort of like, oh, you overpaid us a little bit. Or we decided that there should be some credits because you got kids, you bought a house, you bought a Tesla, electric car, whatever. We'll give you a little bit of a kickback.
A Tesla, the good pastor got a Tesla.
Not even. This good pastor got a minivan. Soccer dad. Okay. And so with that, as I think about my tithing and my giving, it does not fall within the category of negotiable monies, right? My bills are really negotiable because I can call them and be like, I can give you 50 this week, and I can give you another 50 next week. I can call them. Your student loans, they're not gonna send you a default if you just drop them $100. And some of them loans are so much, it's like all you ever gonna give me is $100.
Now, a point you got. I'm
never gonna finish.
A point you have.
Right, and so what we do is that we allow some of these other things to become so anchored and so fixed that they really cause us more stress and concern than we actually have appreciation for what God can do. Right, and so if our spiritual life is to be stretching our faith, part of that faith stretch is that I am not living by bread alone. I am not living by these Caesar dollars, because if tomorrow the economy crashes and we lose our 401ks, our 403bs, our Roth accounts, our IRAs, and everything else, who are you going to call up? If FDIC, right? If FDIC decides that they no longer can provide the insurance to ensure that all the money that you've been having sitting in the bank, all the money that you've been collected, who are you going to call? Right? So at the end of the day, when America's dollar means nothing, because it ain't gonna get you in heaven. I don't care how many American dollars you got. It ain't gonna buy your salvation. It ain't gonna make you okay with God. You still gonna have to have something that is beyond the power of the American dollar. Now, we grow up in a context where the dollar is stable, so it's easy to have faith in it because it's stable. But if we did not have a context where the dollar was stable, if we grew up in Haiti where the value of a Haitian good changes every 25 seconds, there'd be a very different dependence and security that one would have from the money. So we have security in our money because we're Americans. But let America fall.
But are we secure in our faith?
And as you ask that question, Felicia, go ahead and respond to that, and then we'll go ahead and close out.
Sure. I would just say, if I don't pay my taxes, I'm going to jail. If I don't pay my light bill, my light's been cut off. If I don't pay my water bill, my water get cut off. So you see immediate consequences for your actions in nature, on this earth. You see immediate consequences when you don't pay the government, when you don't pay your bills. As far as having your faith, I don't put my faith in money with the Lord. It's just a relationship that you have, an unspeakable relationship that you have with someone that is beyond money to me. It's like a connection that you don't have with anyone else. So even if you're in jail for not paying your taxes, your faith is still with the Lord. You just hoping and praying that it gets you through. So that's what I'm saying. Like on earth, you're gonna have immediate consequences. But with God, as you know that He's going to be there with you forever, no matter if you paying your tithes, no matter what, because for me, it's not what I give or what someone gives to me, it's what I give to others. So as long as I, like we spoke about giving time, so as long as I'm out giving my time, doing being the best human, because we can talk about all of the commandments and all the good stuff of the rules we should follow. I think if the Lord sees in my heart that I'm being the best person that I can possibly be, He's going to continue to bless me no matter if I get money or not.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. We've heard three different perspectives on a very interesting topic. Again, something that we've heard our entire lives. And I think the point of us coming together was not so much to come to an agreement, but to sit down and hear each other, to see where we're coming from, to understand better the perspective of those who, even though we all have a similar context, we have a different perspective. And we hope that through this, somebody is more apt to understand what giving means in their life and to begin to give something, whether it be your time, your talent, your treasure. As we are persons of color, and even if there's a person of color, a non-person of color listening to this, we are built to be in community. We need one another. We need the help and the assistance of one another. So whether you give or whether you don't, find someone to share this life with and be in community because God has purposed it to be so. Until next time, thank you for coming to our dinner table, and we'll see you.